This is the 2020 Genesis G90, and it is the new full-size flagship luxury sedan from Genesis, which is Hyundai's luxury brand. It's intended to compete with other full-size luxury sedans like the Lexus LS or the Mercedes-Benz S-Class, with one big difference: this is way cheaper. Today, I'm going to review the new G90 and see how it stacks up. First, a little overview. Now, like I mentioned, Genesis is Hyundai's relatively new luxury brand, sort of like how Toyota has Lexus and Honda has Acura. Genesis currently has three models, all sedans: the G70, the G80, and the G90, with the G90 being the flagship full-size sedan at the top of the model range. Now, the G90 originally came out a few years ago, and I've already reviewed the old model, which I found to be pretty good. But Genesis has just redesigned the G90 for the 2020 model year, so this is the all-new model. And that means new styling, new interior, new features, pretty much new everything. Under the hood, the G90 offers a choice between two engines. The base model has a 3.3-liter turbocharged V6 that makes 365 horsepower. Or you can step up to the 5-liter V8, like this car, with 420 horsepower. Now, as of this filming, Genesis has not yet announced pricing for the new 2020 G90, but the old one started around $70,000 compared to a base price of around $95,000 for the Mercedes S-Class. Now, that makes the G90 a bit of a bargain, at least on paper, but the question is, how does it measure up? So today I'm going to review the new G90, and I'm going to find out. First, I'm going to take you on a tour of the G90, and I'm going to show you all of the interesting quirks and features of the Genesis flagship sedan. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. All right, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the G90 with the styling. Now, the very first full-size luxury sedan that Hyundai sold here was called the Equus, and it came out 7 or 8 years ago. The styling was very subdued, very restrained, very simple. But over the years, and with the arrival of Genesis, they've gotten more extravagant, more risk-taking, bolder in their designs, and the G90 is a good example of that. For instance, take a look at the wheels. These wheels are no longer subtle and blend-in wheels. They have all these spokes and cuts and diamonds in them, and I think they look incredibly opulent, luxurious, high-end, and they give this car a true full-size luxury sedan look. I love them. And another example of the bolder, more daring design on the latest generation of this car comes with the grille. You can see it's huge. This is the Genesis grille shape they're putting on all of their models, but this is certainly the biggest one yet to truly emphasize that this is the full-size flagship Genesis. But to me, the best example of bolder designs that are trying to stand out more comes with the lighting. And in this car, that starts with the front turn signals. You can see they are huge. This strip that goes all the way through the headlights and wraps around to the side of the car. This front turn signal is larger than the actual headlight in this vehicle. And it continues on the side. Look at the size of this side turn signal. Most automakers put a tiny little light bulb in the mirror housing. This thing has like 12 inches of turn signal LED light strip on the side to emphasize its opulence. But the increased opulence of the lighting in this car is especially noticeable in back, where you have a totally new look back here, punctuated by this new taillight look that's very distinctive. Probably the most noticeable part is, once again, the turn signals. You have these two large LED light strips. You can see they light up in orange, and they go into the trunk lid itself when you turn on the turn signals. Interestingly, if you push on the brake pedal to turn on the brake lights, you can see the brake lights don't go onto the trunk lid. So like in front, the brake lights are actually smaller than the turn signals back here. For some reason, Genesis really wants to emphasize when this vehicle is turning. Of course, you also have a large light bar that stretches across the entire trunk, and when you turn on the headlights, the tail lights light up across the whole lower part of the light bar. And next we move on to the best place to be in the new Genesis, and that would be the back seats. Actually, the best place to be is this back seat, not the one I'm sitting in, and I'll show you why in a second. But either way, the back seats are a pretty nice spot because this is the Genesis Ultimate, and that means you have a lot of features back here. Now, the most obvious, the most immediately noticeable feature in the back of the G90 is the screens mounted on the backs of the front seats. You can see they're sitting there patiently waiting for the rear passengers to turn them on. To do that, you press a little button in this giant rear center console that says PWR-L for the left screen or R for the right screen, and the screens will turn on. Now, once the screens are on, you can do quite a bit back here. These basically mirror the functionality of the front infotainment screen. So that means you can set a navigation destination from the back seats, and then it will go onto the screen in front of you, but also into the front center screen, so then the driver knows where to navigate. You don't even have to speak to your driver, just simply set a destination and the driver will know he must go there. And next up, it's the same thing with the stereo back here. You have stereo controls in your rear seat screen. So you go into those controls and you can select a new satellite radio station or music, whatever, and it will play throughout the entire car. That way, again, you're being chauffeured around in your G90. You don't have to ask the driver to adjust the music. You simply adjust it, and then the driver listens to what you want. And next up, here's a pretty impressive feature of these screens. There's a blue light filter that allows you to adjust the amount of blue light they give off to reduce strain on your eyes. And you don't just turn on or off the blue light filter, you can schedule it. So if you want less blue light from the screens at night to really cut down on the strain on your eyes at night, you can have a timer that just turns the blue light from the screens off in the evenings, and that way you don't have to go into this menu and constantly turn on or off this filter. That is a really incredible piece of attention to detail. But there's more to the luxury in the rear seat of the G90 than those screens. For example, you have power seats back here. There are controls on the side of this rear center console. You can move them forward, back, up, down, anything you want to do. Now, those controls are pretty nice, but the best part is this button marked rest. You press that and it will put the seat into the most restful position. And for this seat, that means moving forward the front seat as much as possible to give the rear occupant as much legroom as possible. So when you press rest, you can see the front seat scoots forward as far as it can, and the rear seat kind of goes into a lounge position for maximum comfort while they're being chauffeured around. That's pretty nice. And speaking of the seat controls back here, you even have a power automated control for the rear headrests. You can press this little button and the headrest will move up or down. Some luxury cars have this for the front. This one even has it for the back. And even more incredibly, you can also move the headrest forward or backwards with this control. You move the switch forward and the headrest will move forward, same deal backwards, so you can adjust even the headrest to your optimal perfect position without having to touch any levers or latches, just a button. And speaking of seat controls, we move into this rear center control area where you can see you have controls for the heated and ventilated rear seats. Press these buttons to turn on heated, ventilated, both sides. That is a nice luxury. You also have controls here for the climate control system in the back. You can use these dials and buttons to adjust the climate control, the placement, the temperature, the fan speed, all your typical climate control stuff. And next up, also in this rear center control area, you push this button near the middle, and that will raise your rear sunshade. So if you want to be shaded from the sun, just push that, the sunshade goes up. Of course, that rear sunshade enhances your luxury experience back here, but you can go even further. If you pull up on the rear power window switch when the window is already up, a power sunshade will extend automatically from the rear door to cover the rear window and provide you even more shade from the sun back here. And there's even a power sunshade for the tiny little rear quarter window to make sure that no part of your cocoon in the back of this car is affected by the sunlight. And next up, another impressive luxury feature back here. I already showed you that you have power seats, but here's a crazy one. You also have memory seats. There are two separate memory positions on the door panel that you can set back here so that depending on which chauffeured passenger gets in the car, they can just push a button and have the seat go right back into their position. Also, next to the memory seat buttons, you have a button marked door. You might be wondering what this is. Unfortunately, it is not an automatic door opener. Instead, if you press that and turn it on, it automatically sets the seat to kind of move out of the way when you open the door to allow you the most possible room to climb in. Then when you get inside and close the door, the seat goes automatically back into your desired position. And next up, a few other G90 luxury touches back here. One is that the ceiling includes vanity mirrors. You push on this little Alcantara surface back here and it will drop down, revealing a mirror, and a light will brighten luxuriously so that you can look at yourself and make sure you look perfect before your big business meeting that your chauffeur is driving you to. And another luxury feature back here, most people probably wouldn't even notice, but it's an important one. You can see there's a little silver like circle thing on the B pillar. What is that for? Well, it's a coat hook. If you're being driven around and you want to put your coat back here, you don't want it to get smushed around or wrinkled when it's on you, or you just throw it down, you can hang it up on that coat hook so it will stay nice for when you have to get out and you need it next. And next up, another luxury touch that I really like back here is on the rear center console armrest area with all the controls, you also have a storage area. Now, if you close the lid for that storage area, you can see the Genesis logo beautifully embossed into the leather. It looks absolutely gorgeous, as you'd expect from a true luxury car. And by the way, speaking of this rear center console with all the controls in this storage area, you can fold it up. This isn't fixed in place. You can fold it up, put it away, and then you have a third seat back here, so you can have 3 people ride in the back if you need. Most of the time though, you'll probably want it down so you can play with all of your rear quirks and features. But all of the luxury features in the G90 are not confined to the rear seat. No. There are quite a few quirks and features up here, my favorite of which is the turn signal camera. Check this out. You're driving along, you put on your turn signal, and then a camera pops up in your gauge cluster to show you what's in the blind spot you've just signaled towards. That is an amazing feature. So you're driving down the highway, you put on your signal to change lanes, and it shows you what is there, which is really, really amazing. Far better than turning around and trying to see what's there, check your blind spot, but you can't because there's pillars and then your eyes are off the road. This camera shows precisely what's next to you, and it works for both sides. Put the turn signal on the other way, it shows you what's in the other blind spot. A brilliant feature. I showed you this in the new Kia K900, which shares a lot of its underpinnings with the Genesis G90, and I'm thrilled to see this feature making its way in to more new vehicles. And next up, speaking of some innovative new features, on the door panel next to the seat memory controls, there is a button marked Smart. So what does that do? Well, you can adjust your seating position to however you like it, or you can push Smart, and then a screen pops up in the infotainment system that tells you to enter your particulars, your height, your weight, your inseam, and then it will adjust the seating position to what it thinks is the optimal for your body size and type. That is absolutely insane. You're not even adjusting your own seat anymore. The car is telling you where you should be sitting based on your size. And next up, I want to talk materials. This car is positioned as sort of a budget Mercedes S-Class, so you're probably wondering how the materials in here stack up to the S-Class. And the answer is, they're pretty good, but they're not quite on that level. As a good example, take a look at the steering wheel. You can see the leather of the steering wheel doesn't quite match the plastic around the steering wheel buttons. The color is just a little bit off. But it isn't just that. All the buttons and switches in here just don't have the same feel of the S-Class. And frankly, these buttons and switches are what you'd get in some lower-end Hyundai and Kia models. For example, the buttons in the center control area pretty much come directly from the Kia Stinger. The turn signal stalk, wiper stalk, not incredibly upscale, like exactly what you'd find in the S-Class. With that said, there are some materials in here that I really do like. For example, I love the textured wood. You can see it in the center console. It looks a lot better than ugly glossy wood. You also have it on the dashboard, this nice piece of textured wood going basically the whole way across. And on the door panel, you have more textured wood. This does look really nice. Beyond that, I also like the look and feel of the seats. You can see they have this nice quilted leather. It's a very soft seat, and the seat is very supportive, like you would expect from a luxury car. It's a very nice looking seat. But while those are some nice touches, again, it just doesn't quite live up to the very best in class. Then again, this car is a lot cheaper than the best in class, so for most people who buy this, they're getting a budget car with all the same equipment and most of the same luxury. They probably won't really care all that much. And next we move on to the glove box, where the biggest quirk in here is literally big. This is an owner's manual that comes with the car. It is absolutely massive, an unbelievable thing. I don't remember the last time I saw such a large owner's manual. Apparently this is a very complicated car. Further proven by the fact that this car also includes a quick reference guide in the glove box. Usually that's a leaflet of like 4 different panels that you fold out. For this car, the quick reference guide is 53 pages. I don't know how quick that reference guide really will be. And next up we move on to the infotainment system in the G90, which is significantly updated over the old one. For one thing, it's now a touchscreen, but that's kind of unusual because it's pretty far away from the driver and passenger. It's set deeply into the dash, so you have to reach pretty far up to touch it. But you can also control it using the control wheel in the center console, so you basically have your pick of how you want to adjust your screen. And next up, there are a couple of interesting items in the infotainment system worth mentioning. One is the fact that the driving info tab shows you not only your acceleration and your braking on your latest drive, but also your idle time. So if you go on like a 3-hour drive, you can check your idle time in here to see how much time you wasted sitting at traffic lights, which is an interesting thing to display. And next up, another interesting item in the infotainment system is the voice memos tab. You click on that, you can record voice memos. You're driving along, you get a brilliant thought, why not record it? You can then save your voice memos to a USB so you can listen to your brilliant thoughts at a later time. Here's one of my brilliant thoughts.
Doug is the type of guy to record a voice memo and then listen to it. Doug is the type of guy to record a voice memo and then listen to it.
And finally, our last interesting interior quirk in this car is what happens when you turn it off. It plays a nice little song to say goodbye. Take a listen. And next up, we move under the hood in the G90, and you can see the V8 under here. Like I mentioned, this is a 5-liter V8, 420 horsepower. That's only about 60 horsepower more than the V6, but this is a naturally aspirated V8, very smooth, one of the last naturally aspirated V8s left. And so people won't necessarily be buying it for the much better acceleration, but maybe for the smoothness. I will say, this engine is unbelievably quiet. Just sitting here with the car on, you can barely tell that it's on. Certainly this is one of the quietest engines I've been around. Very impressive. And next up, since I'm up front, I mentioned the grille earlier and the fact that this is the big, bold, expressive new Genesis grille, but there's something else notable about it. That would be the radar sensor integrated into the grille. You can see it's this little rectangle in the middle. Most automakers try to hide these radar sensors at the front of their cars to varying degrees of success, and I would say that Genesis has done okay. Usually automakers put it in their emblem, but since Genesis doesn't put an emblem on the grille, this is the best they could do. It's a decent job of concealing it, considering it's supposed to mimic that like crosshatch pattern on the grille. And next up, we move on to the trunk in the G90. But before we get into the trunk, I want to talk about opening it, which is kind of unusual. Most automakers integrate their trunk opener right here above the license plate into this lip where it can be concealed, but not the G90. Instead, you have a button sitting right there on the trunk lid, which is kind of odd since it's in a pretty obvious spot. And right above that trunk popper button, you have a rear camera also sitting right out there in the open in a pretty obvious spot. It surprises me that Hyundai didn't try to hide these somewhere to give the rear of the car a cleaner look, but they didn't. Anyway, you want to get into the trunk, you push the button, and then it pops open, and you can see this is a fairly standard trunk. A large one, like you'd expect from a full-size luxury sedan, but a standard trunk nonetheless. One thing I like about this trunk is that the G90 has a traditional carpeted floor like most trunks, but then this G90 has a nice carpeted trunk mat above the carpeted floor for added trunk luxury. And so those are the quirks and features of the new Genesis G90. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives.
All right, driving the G90. I'm gonna step on it here. Feels nice. Nice and quick, but I will say the thing I most noticed when I was driving this car a little bit earlier is just how smooth it is. I don't notice a huge difference in acceleration between the V8 and the V6, I have to say. Maybe in the mid-range, like right now when you're already going 60 and you put your foot down. But you do notice it's a lot smoother from the stop. That's the thing I like about V8s. I have a lot of V8 cars myself, and I really like that low-end smoothness that turbocharged engines don't have. So if you want the smoothest, most luxurious version of this car, you're gonna want the V8. Now, driving along, this car is very smooth and very luxurious, and I'm sure that's true even if you did get the V6. But you definitely don't have the sort of stable, planted, overall feel that you have in the S-Class. Very nice over bumps, very luxurious, but to me it feels more like a really nice E-Class or something of that variety. It's just not quite as stable German bank vault feel to it. With that said, I don't feel any Hyundai in here. This car certainly doesn't have like a Sonata type feel. It's definitely closer to a Mercedes-Benz, a nice one, than it is to a Hyundai or something of that variety. But it's still not quite on the level with the very best of the Germans. Now, with that said, it's cheaper. So it's not necessarily intended to be on that level. If it was the same price and it didn't have the same driving experience, then you kind of call it into question. In terms of the handling, I was driving a little bit earlier around corners and such, and it seems like you'd expect. It's a full-size sedan, and this car is definitely geared more for luxury and for comfort than anything else. There are drive modes in here, and you can put it in sport mode, and that does seem to adjust the throttle response a little bit and maybe tightens the steering a little bit, but we're not talking about a sporty vehicle no matter what we do. This is no AMG S-Class or anything of that variety. Mostly this car is just built for highway driving, and it's really good at that. Generally speaking, I am into this car. It's a lot of money to not get a brand name, Mercedes, BMW, Audi, and so you have to be okay with that. Now, I should mention that Genesis does have a self-driving feature on this car. You put it in cruise control with that self-driving feature activated, and then it will turn on. I'm going to try it right now.
The system works pretty well. It'll pretty much steer for you without requiring your intervention. I did find that it doesn't work as well when the highway starts to curve. It seems like it doesn't trust itself, and it often requires you to take over, which is definitely disappointing, but otherwise it's great, and it's perfect for stop-and-go traffic. And oh my god, look at this thing! This is so cool! I can't believe this! And so that's the 2020 Genesis G90. This is an excellent car, and while it doesn't quite match up to the S-Class in terms of interior materials or driving experience, it's not that far off given the price difference. If you want everything that goes along with a full-size luxury sedan except the cost, and if you don't mind not having a Mercedes-Benz star or 4 Audi rings on your grille, this might be the car for you. And now it's time to give the G90 a Doug score. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the G90 is handsome. The first of these I've really liked, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Acceleration does 0 to 60 in 5.2 seconds, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Handling is about normal for this segment, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Fun factor is okay. It's a V8 and reasonably fast, but it's hardly fun, and it gets a 4 out of 10. Cool factor is fine. Any big luxury sedan is cool, but Genesis isn't exactly the top cool brand, and it gets a 4 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 24 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. The G90 is well equipped, but it lags behind the best in this segment, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Comfort is very good, not perfect, but excellent, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Quality is good, not the standard, but not that far off, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Practicality is normal for a car like this, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Finally, value, and this is a good value, but not quite an amazing one. I think its pricing is in line with its quality and its equipment, and it gets a 7 out of 10 for a total daily score of 36 out of 50. Added up in the Doug score is 60 out of 100, which places it here against other cars in this segment. The G90 ties the Cadillac CT6, which is more technologically advanced with Super Cruise, and it lags behind the true segment leaders. But the G90 is a good car, and it's probably the best Genesis yet.